independent leaders rise from Maine's hard soil. Always have and always will. Take Margaret Chase Smith. When the men in the Senate were terrified of Joseph McCarthy, she called him out. Just like Susan Collins stands up to Donald Trump. Oh, wait. Susan Collins never stands up to Donald Trump. That's why Maine is done with her weakness and excuses. Collins isn't an independent. She's a fraud. Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump control her voice. She makes excuses for corruption, for criminality, for cruelty, all while pretending she's worried, concerned, hoping Donald Trump learns a lesson this time. He never does, because she never stands up, never speaks out, never does what a Maine leader should do. Susan Collins doesn't work for Maine, she works for them. And Maine deserves a leader, not a Trump stooge. It's time for Susan Collins to go. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
That is a devastating ad. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, July the 29th. 2020. That ad was from the Lincoln Project, their brand new ad. And I gotta say, I play that because actually this is not the topic today, but I play that ad because it's an example of the kind of messaging that is needed when you're dealing with Republican politicians. And the Lincoln Project, who made the ad that you just heard, have mastered this to a complete art form. They absolutely have. They've got this down to a science. The people that they employ and the brain trust, I know Rick Wilson obviously is one of the people in there, and Reed Galen and Jennifer Horn and Steve Schmidt. Look, these are all Republicans or former Republicans, and I'm no fan of Republicans in general. Of course, the policies is the reason why I'm no fan of theirs, and also, quite frankly, as you know, the Republican Party has had a long tradition over the last 60 years of being a racist party, and certainly starting with Nixon in earnest. We know that Democrats have this tradition as well. Obviously, the Dixiecrats, I can't even talk. But the fact of the matter is, and of course, the Democrats being the party of enslavement as well. Let's not forget that. The reason I start with the Lincoln Project is you just have to hear that ad on Senator Susan Collins, the Republican senator out of Maine. Now, Maine is a state that is looking more and more Democratic by the minute now. Susan Collins has not been an effective leader for Maine in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate. That's just a fact. If you just look back at all of the things. And that ad, if you notice, you didn't hear a single word from Collins herself. Now, you have to watch the ad to see how strong it is, but you can hear how strong it is. Susan Collins didn't say a word in that ad. You know, usually in ads like these, you will hear from the person that is the subject of the ad. There will normally be some kind of silly thing that they say or incriminating thing that they say. But the measure of how devastating this ad was is that you didn't hear Senator Collins say a single word. And you just had really a litany of adjectives to describe her lack of leadership. She doesn't have leadership. She's like Donald Trump in that way. These folks are not leaders. Leaders are people who put their foot down, who set an example, who tell people in crisis mode what the story is and how they're going to handle something, who reassure the people who are not confident about the future or even about the present. And that's what a true leader is. That's what an actual leader is. That's what a leader is. And neither Donald Trump nor Senator Susan Collins nor any of these Republicans show any kind of leadership at all. And they don't have leadership. They are destroyers. Donald Trump is the first of them. He is a destroyer. He is chief among them. A destroyer. He is not someone who's interested in government. He's not interested in governing. You know the story well, don't you? If you have your political recall back memory-wise, you will know and remember that when Donald Trump was running in 2015 into 2016 for that year's election, he was looking for a VP, and he was looking for people who would do the legwork. He once famously said, and this has been quoted by John Kasich and others, and it's been in the New York Times and other news publications, that when he offered the job to John Kasich, who used to be the Republican governor of Ohio, he said to Kasich, look, you don't have to do, you really don't, you're going to be the most powerful vice president in the history of the United States. You're not going to have to worry about anything. You are going to be the most powerful person. Seriously. I mean, you will have so much power. You'll have more power than I will. I'm going to be the chairman of the board. I'll do the ribbon cutting ceremonies and all of that. But you're the one that's really going to be the brains of this thing. You're going to be at the heart of this. You're going to be the real leader. And so that's what was being offered to Kasich. And Kasich said, no, I'm not doing that. You may remember that Kasich ran for the White House as well, most recently in 2015 and 16 before he had to drop out. I think it was early 2016 where he said goodbye. And he gave a devastating ad, just like the Lincoln Project did, and has done through the last few months now, or almost the last, I think, into late last year or beginning of this year. But nonetheless, John Kasich did a really good ad on Donald Trump in 2015 called Trump's Dangerous Rhetoric. And I urge you to go and look that up on YouTube. It's called Trump's Dangerous Rhetoric. And I've played it here once before on this podcast. So you have to go watch that, though. And also watch this Lincoln Project ad. So now I'm going to get to what the program today, what this episode of today is about. And I have to say one other thing. The Republican Congressman, Louis Gohmert, the news has come out that he has tested positive for coronavirus. This is a Republican congressman from Texas. He's someone who didn't want to wear a mask, really despised wearing one, was not a fan of it, and had said, apparently, according to some published reports, that, in fact, I think it was Manu Raju of CNN, said to Manu Raju, heck, if I get it, then I'll wear a mask. But right now, I'm not going to wear a mask. But I'm not going to wear a mask because, look, I get tested every day and, I don't need to wear one. I'm not going to. But if I do get coronavirus, I will wear a mask. You won't see me without one. I guess now Louis Gohmert will live up to his promise.
Mr. Chairman, Attorney General Barr, you started your testimony with eloquent words about the life and legacy of John Lewis, fighting systematic racism, voter intimidation, civil rights. The one thing that you have in common with your two predecessors, both Attorney General Sessions and Attorney General Whitaker, is that when you all came here and brought your top staff, you brought no black people. That, sir, is systematic racism. That is exactly what John Lewis spent his life fighting. And so I would just suggest that actions speak louder than words. And you really should keep the name of the Honorable John Lewis out of the Department of Justice's mouth. Let me also say, you mentioned bogus Russiagate. In your opinion, as the Attorney General of the United States of America, did Russia interfere or attempt to interfere in the 2016 election?
Yes.
In your position as the Attorney General of the United States, is Russia attempting to interfere in the 2020 presidential election?
I think we have to assume that they are.
Thank you, sir. Now, let's talk about the integrity of the election, which is also something Congressman Lewis fought for. Jared Kushner implied that the president could move the election day. Can a sitting U.S. president move an election day?
Actually, I haven't looked into that question under the Constitution.
Well, 2 U.S. Code Section 7 says federal election day is the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So if you take that as a correct statute, is there any executive action by a president?
I've never been asked the question before. I've never looked into it.
As Attorney General of the United States, do you believe that this 2020 presidential election will be rigged?
I have no reason to think it will be.
Welcome back. So you just heard there a part of the testimony before the House Judiciary Committee yesterday of the Attorney General Bill Barr, who is, as I have detailed in a prior episode of this podcast, a rather loathsome and despicable human being. I mean, this guy is a criminal, and he is somebody who cleans up the messes of criminality in administrations. He is I call the quicker picker upper, somebody who is brought in to clean house, to do the dirty work, to arrange the getaway cars, but also to orchestrate too. He's not just someone who is a picker upper. He is someone who foments the criminality because he's part of it. He is absolutely all in it. So you heard that exchange there between he and the former leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, I believe, Cedric Richmond, who is out of Louisiana, the Democratic congressman, questioning him there, and also talking about John Lewis and how Bill Barr is an absolute racist. I mean, he clearly is misogynist as well, based upon looking at the way he treats the female congressional politicians. I mean, it's despicable. He talked over at least 2 of them yesterday, if not more, and he basically laughed in the face of one, not literally in her face, but laughed as she was talking. I mean, he has profound disrespect for women. I mean, just like his boss. I mean, why would I be shocked by that? I wouldn't be. Why would you be shocked? I don't think you would be. But this is the kind of behavior that we can't have. The Republican Party, and especially the white male Republicans, and there are some black male Republicans who fit this bill, but really this is expressly down to, most of this is about these white male Republican politicians who behave in such despicable ways toward women in particular, and also toward white women, but but also to black women and Latinas. We have seen this with Donald Trump. We saw this last week with Representative Ted Yoho out of Florida. I don't know why I kept saying that he's from California, but he's from Florida. Not that that really makes a lot of difference. There's lots of racist and misogynist people and politicians here too. I mean, but they just don't make a show of saying it out loud. But this is something that Bill Barr continues to do. He did it yesterday. He did that yesterday in the House, at the House Judiciary Committee hearing that went on for a few hours. And I think that Richmond has some good questioning. That there are about 3 or 4 Democratic Congress people who I think did well yesterday in questioning him. and exposing the lies and the hypocrisy. And I think that these hearings, no matter who is doing them, whether it's Republicans in control or Democrats in control, in this case, of course, Democrats because they control the majority in the House. But no matter what, a lot of these things are theater. Regardless of the party, that I will say. You know what I feel about that whole word performative when it's used in a situation where people are getting their skulls cracked open. That's no performance, that's reality. Forgive me for the diversion for a second, because I want to address this. And I know that the context is perhaps a little bit unfair, or the analogy is a little bit unfair. But I hope that you can see why I'm putting these two things together in the way that I am, and how one is not necessarily all that far away from the other, and how language is important. And I go on, and I know I've bored some people to tears with this. But there is a very, very important truth. Language is everything. Language is extremely important. Words are important. They are critical. And the words that we use do matter. So when you have people talking about, well, this is performative authoritarianism or performative fascism or things of that nature, and I've talked about this many times now, and they say this, and they've got their book that they're promoting or whatever it might be, and when you see what's actually happening, you're seeing people are being academic about these things or intellectual about these things. When you see on your TV screen police blinding journalists, when you see on your TV screen police running people over in their vans, when you see on your TV screen police beating up television crews, when you see on your TV screen police snatching up people who are just standing there, like we saw in New York yesterday. And since now that is a trans femme who was snatched up. We saw it right there on the video in New York City yesterday. And she, and there was a trans femme named Nikki, and Nikki was snatched up, literally kidnapped off the street, 25th Street and 2nd Avenue in New York. That's Kips Bay. And I know that area. In New York City, I've been there on a number of occasions. Kips Bay, they had a movie theater there about 5, 6, 7 blocks up 32nd, 33rd Street and 2nd Avenue in Kips Bay. A quieter area, I think, of New York. I don't know if that's changed any since. And they had this big movie theater over there. I don't know if it's still there now. Certainly nobody's going to that theater at the moment. But they snatched up Nikki and renditioned Nikki. And then they released Nikki sometime, I think, early this morning on the East Coast time. And her Congress, I have to really be careful about pronouns. And I mean that sincerely. Nikki's congressional or local politician who represents Nikki put a statement out on Twitter, and I forget her name. I forget the congresswoman's name or the politician's name, but she was saying Nikki was released, and she's still trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Nikki and everything else in terms of what they said to Nikki, these cops, NYPD. And they offered up, well, she had been damaging police cameras, and well, apparently all the people there didn't see Nikki damage a thing. Nikki had been, so this, but here's the thing, right? We talk about this performative stuff, and people, you hear people saying it, and then you think about something like Sandy Hook and these ridiculously evil people who say, oh, they were acting. That didn't really happen. That didn't really happen over there in Sandy Hook. You know, those people, these scumbags like Alex Jones and all these folks who say things like this. These conspiracy theorists and these other people who, and you know, I'm not even going to mention the groups because you know who I'm talking about and you know who they are. And they all say, oh, well, you know, this stuff didn't happen. It was actors. They were just actors. They were acting. Do you see how dangerous that is? I mean, people ordinarily won't associate scholars and people who are intellectuals and from the intelligentsia who come on television and say things like, well, you know, this is performative fascism. This is performative, right? Versus the wackos over here on the other side saying things like, well, those folks at Sandy Hook, that wasn't real. Do you understand why it's dangerous? Do you understand why, one of the reasons why I keep saying that this is not a joke? Please stop calling this a performance of this, what Donald Trump and his goons are doing, his goon squad, his Gestapo. Can we stop with this performative? I understand why you're saying it. I get it, and I get why you're saying it and what you mean. But like I said, language and words mean everything, and you have to be very careful. This is no performance, just like Sandy Hook is not a performance. And I know that these writers and authors and intellectuals did not say that about Sandy Hook. But do you see how we can go from someone saying something on this side of the room that's, oh, well, it's performative fascism, when you see people getting their heads knocked off and getting beaten up and all kinds of stuff's happening to them, shot at and killed and all this. Oh, it's performative fascism. This has performative, that's what's going on. Versus over on the other side of the room, these people saying, oh, Sandy Hook didn't happen. The World Trade Center didn't happen. Do you see why that's a really dangerous thing? To have those two things butting up against each other, even in the same ether, let alone the same country or the same room? It's really not wise to be saying these kinds of things. And I think sometimes people get in love with the sound of, well, I better not say anything more because then I think I'll be accused of the same thing. I divert, don't I? I divert. But I divert for a reason, because I think that these things need to be said. And I don't think they are often said. And if they are often said, it's not publicly. So, back to where I was, which is Cedric Richmond and Bill Barr. Bill Barr has been a loathsome creature. And I have detailed an episode of, and I'm not going to get into it in any detail now because I did this several weeks ago on an episode of this podcast where I said here on the Politicrat that Bill Barr is really what I would call the Prince of Darkness, although that nickname for him kind of may sound good to him. It might sound like a good nickname rather than one that is not good, because he really should be having a nickname that is one that befits the kind of damage he has done to this country and also really to government. This guy is a pig. Can I say that? I suppose I can. He has done a lot of damage. And so this testimony yesterday was, I think, very revealing but not surprising. I think that Bill Barr came to defend his boss, obviously, and to show the contempt for governing processes that he has shown through the, 2 years now that he's been in charge? I don't know how long it's been. 2 years? Yeah, it's been about 2 years, isn't it? Or a year and a half. For the year and a half or so that he's been in charge. We know what he did with the Mueller report. I've talked about that before. It came up again yesterday. We know what's happened with his behavior, with what's going on with the situations in these states. I've talked about that. Remember the situation that happened on June the 1st in D.C., although that's not a state. But the point is that Bill Barr has been orchestrating things that are not good. So there's going to be a few clips about what's been going on and what happened at that hearing yesterday. And you heard the clip with Richmond and Barr. And this is another clip you're going to be hearing. Now, there were 3 or 4, as I said, Democrats in Congress yesterday who I think did a good job. Most of them did not. I think the problem with these kinds of hearings for the Democrats is that they do not have the teeth and the bite that you've got to have when you're questioning people like Bill Barr or any other Republican. You've got to have this really ferocious, strong, clinical, detailed, forensic, not so much detailed, but forensic, I say, which is a form of detail, but forensic. You've got to have a forensic approach. And I think those clips that you have heard so far, the one clip you've heard so far, and then a few others that I'm going to play, show us the good things that happen when Democrats are forensic, when Democrats are taking no prisoners, when Democrats are aggressive and aren't sitting there stumbling and staggering over their words. And, that is not the kind of thing you find Republicans doing very often when they have control, particularly in the House, when they had control of the House up until the end of 2018. They were relentless. And even when they were wrong, which was all the time, they made clear that not only were they in charge, but this is what we're going to do. And it was reckless. It was wrong. It was criminal, quite frankly, I think. That didn't stop the Republicans from hitting that hammer and smacking it into the nail and continuing to slam it, into the nail. That's something that they do well, which is hence the ad I played at the beginning from the Lincoln Project, their new ad. They know how to message. They know how to get together as a group, unified, whether they're on the defense or whether they're on offense, and they know how to fight. They're fighting for the wrong thing, in my point of view, and they are fighting on the wrong side of history, and they've been doing it for 60 years plus now, about 60 years. But this is what they do well. They fight. They fight. And they will protect their own. That's another thing they will do. Democrats don't do that. We've seen that. We've seen that recently. We've seen it in the past. I don't have to go back to Al Franken, but you get the idea. Nobody circled the rat. Look, and I'm not condoning anything that Al Franken may or may not have done. I'm not here doing that. But one thing you know about Republicans is they would have circled as they have, and as despicable as it is, they would have circled around an Al Franken if he had an R next to the end of his last name in parentheses. You know that. I know that. Bill Barr and Eric Swalwell, the congressman out of California, and they had a little back and forth yesterday. Eric Swalwell is a Democratic congressman who ran for president, if you may remember. It was a fairly brief and short-lived affair. He had actually dropped out, I think, before the end of 2019. He said sayonara, if you will, to the Democratic presidential race. He simply just did not have enough money or traction to sustain a run. So he didn't make it into 2020 as far as the Democratic presidential contenders were concerned, but he still knows how to question people when it comes to his job in the House. And he did a decent job for the most part here. He underscored a couple of things, and he didn't necessarily go at it aggressively. But what I will say about him is that he was persistent. He was persistent. What is interesting, and you will hear this, is that when he gets to the end of his questioning, toward the end, he mentions, well, you say that you're that Donald Trump's tweets did not make it easy for you to do your job. And you got to listen to this. You listen to this. It's the next 5 minutes or so. Very interesting stuff. I mean, and Barr makes these incredible admissions. So I'm going to leave you for the next 5 minutes or so with this line of questioning. And this was part of what Congressman Swalwell asked Bill Barr yesterday.
And I have never heard of a dispute. I've never heard of a dispute in the department where line prosecutors threatened to quit.
Well, it's a pretty big deal, and they
because of a discussion over sentencing.
Americans from both parties are concerned that in Donald Trump's America, there's two systems of justice. One for Mr. Trump and his cronies, and another for the rest of us. But that can only happen if you enable it. At your confirmation hearing, you were asked, do you believe a president could lawfully issue a pardon in exchange for the recipient's promise to not incriminate him? You said, no.
Not to what?
That would be a crime. You were asked, could a president issue a pardon in exchange for the recipient's promise to not incriminate him? And you responded, no, that would be a crime. Is that right?
Yes, I said that.
You said a crime. You didn't say it'd be wrong. You didn't say it'd be unlawful. You said it would be a crime. And when you said that a president swapping a pardon to silence a witness would be a crime, you were promising the American people that if you saw that, you would do something about it. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, Mr. Barr, are you investigating Donald Trump for commuting the prison sentence of his longtime friend and political advisor, Roger Stone?
No.
Why not?
Why should I?
Well, let's talk about that. Mr. Stone was convicted by a jury on 7 counts of lying in the Russia investigation. He bragged that he lied to save Trump's butt. But why would he lie? Your prosecutors, Mr. Barr, told a jury that Stone lied because the truth looked bad for Donald Trump. And what truth is that? Well, Donald Trump denied in written answers to the Russia investigators that he talked to Roger Stone during the time Roger Stone was in contact with agents of a Russian influence operation. There's evidence that Trump and Stone indeed did talk during that time. You would agree that it's a federal crime to lie under oath. Is that right?
Yes.
It's a crime for you, it's a crime for me, and it's certainly a crime for the President of the United States. Is that right?
Yes.
So if Donald Trump lied to the Mueller investigators, which you agree would be a crime, then Roger Stone was in a position to expose Donald Trump's lies. Are you familiar with the December 3rd, 2018 tweet where Donald Trump said Roger Stone had shown guts by not testifying against him?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
You don't read the president's tweets?
No.
Well, there's a lot of evidence in the president's tweets, Mr. Attorney General. I think you should start reading them because he said Mr. Stone showed guts. But on July 10 of this year, Roger Stone declared to a reporter, I had 29 or 30 conversations with Trump during the campaign period. Trump knows I was under enormous pressure to turn on him. It would have eased my situation considerably, but I didn't. The prosecutors wanted me to play Judas. I refused. Are you familiar with that Stone statement?
Actually, I'm not.
So how can you sit here and tell us, why should I investigate the President of the United States if you're not even aware of the facts concerning the President using the pardon or commutation power to swap the silence of a witness?
Because we require, a reliable predicate before we open a criminal investigation.
And I just gave you, sir.
I don't consider it. I consider it a very Rube Goldberg theory that you have.
Well, it sounds like you're hearing this.
And by the way, if I applied this standard, there'd be a lot more people under investigation.
Mr. Attorney General, the very same day that Roger Stone said that, Donald Trump.
That's one of the
no surprise.
The true two standards of justice were really during the tail end of the Obama administration.
Mr. Attorney General, let's turn to the Michael Cohen case. Are you aware, sir, that Michael Cohen, after being released from prison, was asked to not engage with the media, including to write a book? Were you aware that that was going to be asked of him?
Was I aware?
Yes.
No.
Do you know if anyone else in your department was aware?
Maybe I should tell you what happened.
Why don't you tell us what happened?
Okay. He was furloughed from the Bureau of Prisons.
No. Why don't you tell us why he was asked?
I will tell you. Because
to...
something that people don't seem to understand is that his home confinement was not being supervised by the Bureau of Prisons. It was being supervised by the probation office, which is part of the U.S. court system. And it was the U.S. court system that had the requirements about not writing.
That U.S. court system called your actions retaliatory. Do you agree with that?
No. So all I know is what has been said in court before the judge and in the record, which is that the individual was then called by the U.S. court system saying that this guy Cohen is uncooperative. He's not agreeing to the conditions. And at that point, a Bureau of Prisons person made the decision that he was no longer eligible for home confinement.
Conditions that a federal judge said no other inmate had ever been asked of in his experience. Mr. Barr, you told ABC News that the president's tweets sometimes make your job impossible. But, sir, your job is only impossible if you enable the president's corrupt schemes. And I yield back.
If you think that Donald Trump did not have any kind of conversation with Bill Barr, and if you think that someone at the White House did not have any kind of conversation with Bill Barr about Roger Stone, you are absolutely in another planet, in another solar system. You're on another planet and you're in another solar system. Because there is no way on earth that Roger Stone, who is a 40-year friend, 45-year friend of Donald Trump, there is no way on earth that Roger Stone, who has openly said that he has the goods on Donald Trump and said, well, they try to compel me to say things about Donald Trump, but I will never do that. I mean, the guy was out in public, saying that, look, I am not going to give him up. And the notion that nobody would have gone to Bill Barr and said, look, this is my buddy over here. This is his buddy over here. You got to make sure that he doesn't get any time. I mean, come on. Roger Stone's a criminal and he's been found guilty. And why do you think people resign from the Justice Department? So that's where Bill Barr, again, loses big time here, because he just lies. And he lied throughout the hearing yesterday. And I wanted to provide that background. I wish that Swalwell had got to that. I know that you can't get to everything in 5 minutes or so, because there's a lot going on. You have to, be prepared for the answer that somebody gives, in this case, Bill Barr. Bill Barr is an attorney, he's going to lawyer you, and he's going to be very precise about the language he uses, which is very important. As an attorney myself, I'm a proponent of that. And I think it's very important. Even if you're not an attorney, I think it is wise to use language and use it carefully and use it in a way that is very clear as well. But the bottom line is that, the bottom line is that Bill Barr did not do himself much good yesterday. He was arrogant, brusque, rude, snorting, sniffing, chuckling and laughing during the Democratic Congress people asking questions of him. Arrogant, interrupting them, talking over them, shouting, raising his voice. I mean, we've seen these Republicans, particularly Republican white males. We've seen Republican white males in Congress, and their behavior is despicable. And we've seen Republican white men who sit before Congress to testify in front of Congress, and their behavior is despicable. Their conduct is unbecoming. We saw this with Brett Kavanaugh and how he disrespected several female senators, including Amy Klobuchar. You remember what happened there. I mean, it was nakedly obvious to the world that Brett Kavanaugh did not comport himself at all in accordance with someone who fit the bill of a Supreme Court justice. He should never have got that position. And he only got it because Donald Trump and his daughter, Ivanka, went up to Anthony Kennedy and basically bribed him to retire. I mean, Lord knows what else they did or said to him. Got him to retire earlier than he really was probably going to go. He was going to retire at some point, but to get him to retire in 2018 and then to put this guy on, Kavanaugh, who's I think in his 50s now, he's going to be there for another 30 years at least. But to get Brett Kavanaugh on that court, I mean, with all of the things that were said about Kavanaugh, all the things we saw about him, this guy clearly engaged in sexual assault, in my view. I mean, I think that's very, very clear based on the testimony of Dr. Ford, based on the accounts that we've heard from so many people, so many women who said that there were stories about him when they were in high school, when they were in college. There were stories about his drinking and about the way he encountered women and what he was doing that were absolutely criminal. And now this guy is on the Supreme Court. You've got more than a few of these kinds of people. And there's a black man, too, who's a Republican. So it's not solely white men. But, you know, we know about Clarence Thomas, don't we? And we know, quite frankly, about Joe Biden not allowing Anita Hill to have her witnesses come forward and testify, which I think is one of the biggest disgraces of Joe Biden, quite frankly. And we also know about Tara Reid and how that is now completely not being talked about. It's not being talked about at all now. We're all focusing, admittedly myself included, on who Joe Biden will pick next week as his VP. I mean, it's kind of sad that we're not talking about these other things that we should be talking about. But this is what I predicted. I predicted this, and I didn't necessarily say it here. I may have done. I've done an episode about Tara Reid and about her allegations and about Joe Biden and about Joe Biden's past. And I've gone into those things in quite significant detail and time. But I do think that in the case of where we are now focusing on next week, and I'll get to that in a future episode. But all of these things are timed, because if you think that Bill Barr is not going to play a role in the elections, think again. Think again. And he talked with the representative from Rhode Island, David Cicilline, who did an excellent job. And you will hear just how good he was. He was very good yesterday. And I'm going to be playing some of that for you next.
Sustained effort to undermine the finding of Russian interference in our election. In March 2019, you sent a letter to the committee mischaracterizing Special Counsel Robert Mueller's finding that Vladimir Putin interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion to benefit Donald Trump. Mr. Mueller promptly sent you a letter calling you out for your mischaracterization, and you never corrected it. You then delayed the release of the full report, leaving the American people stewing with your misleading summary in support of President Trump's bogus claims that there was no collusion, no obstruction. You repeat these claims today, that there was no basis for this investigation and it was politically motivated by calling it the Russiagate scandal. But of course, in December 2019, the Justice Department's own Inspector General, your department's, Michael Horowitz, found that the investigation had been initiated properly and without political bias. Isn't that correct?
No.
It's not correct? That was not Mr. Horowitz's finding?
No. He said...
You are wrong, Mr. Attorney General. He's found the investigation had been initiated properly.
He said he found...
Reclaiming my time without political bias.
He said he
found
no evidence.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Attorney. In April of this year, the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee unanimously found that Russia interfered with our elections and attempted to undermine American democracy, correct?
And I said so, too.
Is it ever appropriate, sir, for the president to solicit or accept foreign assistance in an election?
It depends what kind of assistance.
Is it ever appropriate for the president or presidential candidate to accept or solicit foreign assistance of any kind in his or her election?
No, it's not appropriate.
Okay. Sorry you had to struggle with that one, Mr. Attorney General. Now let's turn to the First Amendment. Americans all across this country have been exercising their First Amendment rights to peacefully protest police brutality against black people. I've read your statement. I listened to you this morning, and we're certainly aware of certain individuals who have engaged in violent acts. And we all agree that's wrong. But there was a lot missing from your statement. For example, as I'm sure you've also seen, the vast majority of protesters are peaceful. And despite that, unidentified federal agents have attempted to prevent these mothers, veterans, and peaceful Americans from exercising their First Amendment rights, even using unmarked vehicles to grab protesters off the street and using tear gas and munitions against them. You forcefully condemned protesters this morning, but let me ask you, sir, why have you not condemned the federal officers you're sending into cities without proper training who are attempting to take away the constitutional rights of Americans peacefully protesting?
I haven't condemned protesters. Protesters are good. Demonstrations are good. They're part of the First Amendment.
So let me ask
what I'm condemning is people who commit crime.
Yeah, we agree. Do you think it's ever appropriate, Mr. Barr, for officers to use force against peaceful protesters? Yes or no?
Not against peaceful protesters.
So you also don't mention in your statement today or your testimony that federal officers have even tear-gassed elected representatives. County Commissioner Sharon Myron confirmed firsthand, last night I was tear-gassed by a federal occupying force. I saw throw canisters of poison without warning into a nonviolent crowd, including elders and the vulnerable. And on July 23rd, the mayor, Ted Wheeler, was tear-gassed. He called the tactics of the officers abhorrent. These are elected representatives with grave concerns that officers are using abhorrent tactics, including tear-gassing elderly, nonviolent Americans. So let me ask you, sir, do you think it's ever appropriate to use tear gas on peaceful protesters, yes or no?
Well, the problem in these things sometimes occur because it's hard to separate people who...
Mr. Barr, my question is very specific. Do you think it is ever appropriate to use tear gas on peaceful protesters?
It is,
yes or no?
It is appropriate to use tear gas when it's indicated to disperse...
On peaceful protesters?
To disperse an unlawful assembly, and sometimes, sir, unfortunately, peaceful protesters are affected by it.
Okay, now I'm going to show you there's video evidence as well. I'm going to ask you to look at this video. Just so you know...
This is the video that's capturing the nation's attention this weekend, shot by Tribune reporter.
That video is of Christopher David, a Navy veteran, being beaten and tear-gassed by the officers. Do you think that was appropriate?
Well, I didn't see him tear gas. There seems to be gas in the area. I don't know what kind of gas it was, and I don't know whether it was directed at him.
Do you think what happened to Mr. David was appropriate, Mr. Barr?
The Inspector General is reviewing that particular
Well,
incident.
do you think he deserved to get pepper sprayed and beaten to the point of broken bones?
As I say, the Inspector General is going to review the incident.
So as the top law enforcement official in our country, do you think Americans who show up to peacefully protest should expect to be beaten and pepper sprayed and have their bones broken by federal officers?
Well, I don't think that what was happening immediately around the courthouse was a peaceful protest.
That's not my question, Mr. Barr.
Well, that's where that...
My question is, do you think as the chief... Reclaiming my time, Mr. Barr. My question is, do you think, as the top law enforcement official in this country, that Americans who show up to peacefully protest should expect to be beaten, pepper sprayed, and have their bones broken by federal officials? Yes or no?
I don't think peaceful protesters should face that.
And that's correct. And isn't protecting the First Amendment freedom of Americans at least as important as protecting a building from vandalism?
I think
we've fought for. I've not posed a question. We fought for a democracy, for the right to speak freely, and you are attempting to take that away. What's worse, you're doing it for the sole purpose of furthering the president's political agenda and generating footage for Trump campaign commercials. The Justice Department is responsible for protecting the constitutional rights of Americans, not to serve serve as the president's personal bully or political director. And speaking of protesters, it's worth remembering every suffragette, every person who marched to end child labor, every abolitionist who demanded an end to slavery was a protester. The revolutionaries who transformed us from colonists into a nation were protesters. Protesters aren't chaos. They're deeply American examples of values, a desire for this country to be at its best self. They're righteous, sometimes they're necessary. One of America's most beloved and effective protesters, John Lewis, lies in state 1,000 feet from here in a deserved place of honor. And, sir, your failure to respect the role of peaceful protest in this country is a disgrace. It's un-American. And it's important to remember what these protests are about. Black Lives Matter. Abuse at the hands of police by black Americans. And I want to let you see now a video that fairly represents peaceful protest that is happening all across America that you conveniently omitted from your testimony and your statement. There was a 9-minute video shown by the other side, so it's
not all 9, only part of it.
So that was just some of what David Cicilline had to say. And the congressman out of Rhode Island, I think, was very incisive. I mean, you could just hear it. You could, if you see it, you will see he's had enough of Barr. He really has had enough of him. And he took no prisoners. I mean, this is the kind of thing Democrats have to do. When I talk about getting tough, get tough. You know, say what you have to say. I know it sounds like it may be theater. Oh dear, here I go again with the performance issue. The performance issue. but this is this is what you have to do as a Democrat. And Representative Premier Jayapal also did exactly what you have to do when you're questioning someone like Bill Barr. I mean, I think this is what sums up. I think Jayapal did the best job of anybody yesterday. Representative Jayapal out of Washington State did the best job of anyone yesterday with the questioning. I mean, her questions were really good. Her statement, her conclusions, incisive, everything. The questioning was very good. I mean, she drew a conclusion, and what happened is that her questions followed from it, and then, you know, she stated the conclusion. Obviously, that's what good questioners, attorneys do. They root their questions in the basis of the conclusion that they have already got to based upon what they've learned and known about the facts. And the facts are is that Bill Barr did not go after people that he should have gone after. Look, I mean, nobody wants feds running around who are doing things that are illegal. You know, renditioning people. There is no authority in the Constitution for somebody to rendition someone who is engaging in First Amendment freedom of speech and assembly. There is nothing in the Constitution that says you can rendition them and take them somewhere. But you violate their Fourth Amendment rights. There's nothing like that. I know people talk about posse comitatus, and that's to do with bringing in troops, if I'm not federal officers, I think. Something like that. I should really read that before I say that, so that's something that I should hold my tongue on. But, look, listen, this is the issue, is that you have to bring the contradictions to light. And I wish Swalwell had done a bit more of that, but this is what Jayapal did. Congresswoman Jayapal did that. And you can hear it right here, right now.
June 1st, there were protests against the murder of George Floyd and police brutality in Lafayette Park. Let us not be distracted by you or my GOP colleagues as to what these powerful and massive protests were actually about. They were about the persistent killing of Black bodies by law enforcement, and finally, an awakening in America of the conscience of our country. And yet your response, Mr. Barr, was to direct federal officers to close in on the protesters and to use shields offensively as weapons, tear gas, pepper balls, irritants, explosive devices, batons, and horses to clear the area just so the president could get a photo op. So I do want to ask you, do you think the response at Lafayette Square to tear gas, pepper spray, and beat protesters and injure American citizens who were just simply exercising their First Amendment rights was appropriate?
Well, first, it's my understanding that no tear gas was used on Monday, June 1st.
Mr. Barr, that is a semantic distinction that has been proven false by many fact checkers.
How is it semantic? How is it semantic? Tear gas is a particular compound.
You talked about chemical irritants, and it has been proven false by reports. So just answer the question. Do you think that it was appropriate at Lafayette Park to pepper spray, tear gas, and beat protesters and injure American citizens?
Well, I don't accept your characterization of what happened, but as I explained, the effort there was...
Mr. Barr, I just asked for a yes or no, so let me just tell you, I'm starting to lose my temper. According to sworn testimony before the House Natural Resources Committee by Army National Guard officer Adam DeMarco, who was there, this was, quote, an unprovoked escalation and excessive use of force against peaceful protesters.
Well, I don't remember
reports
DeMarco as being...
Mr. Barr, excuse me, this is my time. Sir, the president told governors on a telephone call that the way to deal with the protesters of police brutality and systemic racism like in Lafayette Square is that, quote, you have to get much tougher. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. These are terrorists. And he also talked about you on that call, sir. Here's what he said. He said, the Attorney General is here, Bill Barr, and we will activate Bill Barr and activate him strongly. Do you remember that call, Mr. Barr?
Yes, I do, but he wasn't talking about protesters. He was talking
Mr.
about
Barr,
rioters.
Apparently the president believes that you can be activated to implement the president's agenda and dominate American people exercising First Amendment rights if they're protesting against him. But let's look at how you respond when the protesters are supporters of the president. On two separate occasions, after President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," to subvert stay-home orders to protect the public health of people in Michigan, protesters swarmed the Michigan Capitol carrying guns, some with swastikas, Confederate flags, and one even with a dark-haired doll with a noose around its neck. Are you aware that these protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded?
No.
You're not aware of that?
I was not aware of it.
Major protests in Michigan. You're the Attorney General, and you didn't know that the protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded. So obviously you couldn't be concerned about that.
Well, there are a lot of protests around the United States, and on June 1st, I was worried about the District of Columbia, which is federal.
In certain parts of the country, you're very aware of those, but when protesters with guns and swastikas and Confederate flags, excuse me, Mr. Barr, this is my time, and I control it. You are aware of certain kinds of protesters, but in Michigan, when protesters carry guns and Confederate flags and swastikas and call for the governor of Michigan to be beheaded and shot and lynched, somehow you're not aware of that. Somehow you didn't know about it, so you didn't send federal agents in to do to the president's supporters what you did to the president's protesters. In fact, you didn't put pepper balls on those protesters. So the point I'm trying to make here, Mr. Barr, that I think is very important for the country to understand, is that there is a real discrepancy in how you react as the Attorney General, the top cop in this country, when white men with swastikas storm a government building with guns. There is no need for the president to, quote, activate you because they're getting the president's personal agenda done. But when black people and people of color protest police brutality, systemic racism, and the president's very own lack of response to those critical issues, then you forcibly remove them with armed federal officers, pepper bombs, because they are considered terrorists by the president. You take an aggressive approach to Black Lives Matter protests, but not to right-wing extremists threatening to lynch a governor if it's for the president's benefit. Did I get it right, Mr. Barr?
I have responsibility for the federal government, and the White House is the seat of the executive
Mr. Barr, let me
branch,
just make it clear. You are supposed to
the Michigan
represent
authorities
the
can
people
handle
of the United States of America, not violate people's First Amendment rights. You are supposed to uphold democracy and secure equal justice under the law, not violently dismantle certain protesters based on the president's personal agenda.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to also introduce into the record a report from the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, which says that over the past 20 years, more than 250 million ballots have been cast by mail, and the fraud rate is 0.00006%.
Without objection.
Bravo, or I should say brava to Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington State, the Democrat, who is running for another term. I think she will be reelected. I would certainly, if I lived in Washington State and certainly in the district that she presides in, serves, I definitely would be voting for her. I think I guess it's easy for us to keep doing this and wanting to anoint the next, even though we are living in the present. Can we just go through these times and deal with that and struggle with it and grow and try to learn? I know we all do it, right? I do it too. The next whomever. Well, I don't want to say that I do that, but I do want to say that she is going to, Representative Pramila Jayapal, is going to be a presidential candidate at some point. I think that you're going to see within the next 10 years that Pramila Jayapal will run for the office of President of the United States. I think that is going to happen within 10 years. It's July, almost at the end of July now, 2020. I think that by the time we get to 2030, she will have run for office, for the highest office in the land. You heard it here first. I think she'd make an excellent president in this country. But like they all do, meaning they, politicians, like every politician, I should say it like that, like every politician does, they have to pay their dues some way. Even Obama, who, yeah, I know he didn't spend a whole lot of time in the Senate, he had to pay his dues, though. He lost in a congressional race in Chicago. He lost in a race there, a district race in Chicago. So even Barack Obama, who some people still think he just coasted, he was in the Senate for 4 years or 3 years or whatever it was, and boom, he's gone. And well, he had to pay his dues too. He had to take his lumps. He lost a political race. He went through that. He went through that humbling. Everybody goes through these things. Nobody is unscathed. Donald Trump won't be unscathed on November the 3rd or 4th. He won't be. He will go down to defeat here. And he'll go down, I think, by a big margin. It's just a question of how big that big margin is going to be. But we have to vote. And that brings me to the next 2 states on the list. I did 4 of them because there weren't any published on Monday. So I did 4 of them. I included the 2 that I had done, but couldn't fit into the episode. It was a very important episode about domestic violence, very important subject, and I do plan to revisit that in different facets of what that means, but not just what it means, but the support system and the support networks that we need to talk about, because that never gets talked about. And I'm talking about support networks for the families of people involved in all areas, which is really a broader discussion that is going to be had at some point, and you'll be able to listen to some of that on this podcast. So please stay tuned there. But I do want to now talk about the states, 2 more states today, the state of Connecticut and the state of Delaware. They're on the eastern seaboard there. And Connecticut is a rather, I think, straightforward process in terms of their voting. So if you are a Connecticut voter, you will want to be listening now. If you want to register to vote, make sure that you go to this web address, portal, PORTAL, .CT, that's Charlie, Tammy, .gov, / S as in Sam, O as in Orange, T as in Tom, S as in Sam. That will get you to the area of the Secretary of State of Connecticut's website that you really want to be in. That's probably the best I can say about that, because there's a lot of different moving parts on that website, but that's the easiest way to get to where you need to get to as a voter. So if you go to that area, what you will find is the Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, with a seal on the left-hand side of the page. On the right-hand side, a photo of her smiling at you, as we've seen with all the Secretaries of State, male and female. A nice smiling picture of them on the front page of their homepage of their website. And then you go down, scroll down, and you see the words register to vote online. And of course, if you are someone who needs to register to vote in Connecticut, and you are obviously a Connecticut voter, you click on there, and you can click on either that link or the online voter registration link. That takes you to the page you need to get to. And you have a choice of English and Spanish, and then you just follow the prompts from there. That's what you have to do to register to vote in Connecticut. Straightforward, simple, and clear. Now, if you need to check your voter registration, and you are someone who has voted before in Connecticut and you need to check your registration, then what you need to do on that same page that you got to, which is portal.ct.gov / S as in Sam, OTS. Once you get to that page, that homepage, what you will then do is, if you want to check your registration, on the left, you will see something that says Elections and Voting. It's a big gray box, and it's the top subject matter in that box. Click on Elections and Voting. That will then bring you to another page, and that page will have a number of things on it. Now, there's a lot of things on that page. What I would like you to do, if you are a Connecticut voter, is to slowly scroll down that page, and it will say in black letters, it will say voter information. That will be the first thing you will see. And it is underneath a sky blue colored, or I should say teal, slightly looks like a teal colored rectangular box. underneath that teal colored or light blue colored, powder blue colored, whatever kind of blue that is, it's kind of a teal color. Aqua, might be aqua colored box. Underneath that aqua colored rectangular box, you'll see the words voter information. And then there will be a series of bullet points with topics on them. You want to go to where it says, "Am I registered to vote?" It's about the 6th bullet point down. Click on "Am I registered to vote?" And then you will then come to a next page that says voter registration information on it. And you need to just kind of scroll down just a little bit. And then it says, "Am I registered to vote? Use our voter lookup tool to check your current voter registration status." So then you click on the voter lookup tool, which is a hyperlink, so you'll see it. It's in blue lettering. Click on that, and then it takes you to voter registration lookup. That's how you register to vote in Connecticut. Rather, that's how you check your voter registration to see if you're still registered in Connecticut. And you just go from there. It'll ask you, it's pretty self-explanatory, but you see how you have to jump through a couple of hoops. It's not directly clear. And I wish that it had been all central in one place. It's a very decentralized process. You have to go through a couple of clicks here and there. And I know some people don't have the patience to do that. They want everything in one corner of a website. And I get it. You don't want to spend time hunting around on websites. I think that's one of the reasons why people love social media, because everything is right there. You click here, you click here, you click here, you know exactly where everything is, and you're usually doing it on your phone or on a small device. So boom, 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 everything is right there. On websites, if you're looking at them, particularly obviously if you're looking at them on a laptop or a desktop, you have to hunt around for things because everything isn't all on one page necessarily. But anyway, I have just described for you what you need to do to register to vote or to check your voter registration in Connecticut. By the way, remember to check your voter registration once a week through the end of October. Very important. There is lots of good information, however, on the Connecticut website. Lots of it. And of course, there are areas for questions if you need to ask questions. There's a lot of things. And the thing is, the reason why I gave you the portal.ct.gov/SOTS site address is because it's the easiest one to give you. Because if I gave you the other one, it would just be confusing. So it's a shame, again, that this is not made a bit more easy in some cases. But once you do get to the Connecticut site and once you get to checking your registration or registering to vote, it is fairly straightforward. There's lots of information on here. And I should say that on August the 11th, there is a primary. There are Democratic and Republican primaries on August the 11th. Why August the 11th? Why so late, you ask? Well, because of coronavirus. The governor of Connecticut, Ned Lamont postponed the primaries. They were supposed to be held, I think, back in June or May. And Governor Lamont postponed them, and of course, because of the coronavirus. And so now the primaries are going to go ahead on August the 11th. So those primaries will be going ahead in the Democratic side. These are all local state senator and state representative primaries. Also judgeships, probate judge vacancies. There is early voting in Connecticut. At the beginning of last year, the Secretary of State introduced or announced that there was an amendment to do early voting in Connecticut that provided for at least 3 days of early voting, at least 3, a minimum 3. which would mean that if you're voting in this general election in November, on November 3rd, many people aren't going to go in person because of coronavirus, then you will be, I guess, August, oh my gosh, October the 29th, October the 30th, the day before Halloween. Would that be the time? Look, if you're not clear on that, please consult their website. And then, I think that's important. I would certainly do some searching on it. But I can only give you, what I'm giving you is just the registering to vote and checking your voter registration and being aware of the fact that you can vote early in Connecticut. I just, quite frankly, do not know exactly the earliest day to register to vote. But what I would do is contact the Secretary of State and get that Secretary of State's office phone number. These things can be found once you really get their phone numbers and try to contact them, because there is so much to hunt through on this website. There's a lot of things here, which I think is good, but I think the problem with it is that you can get lost here looking at all of this, and it can get to be an endless look at what we're seeing here. So that is what we are looking at. I do not see an exact date for early voting, but it's at least 3 days before the election. And the deadline to register it's not clear here for Connecticut. But I urge you to register right now. Do not wait. In all of these states that I'm going to be doing here as I've done here over the next, and I will continue to do, I urge you to register immediately to vote. Do it now. Do not wait. Do not procrastinate. It's late July. We're almost at August. Next week, Joe Biden is going to announce his VP pick. And again, I will get into that in a future episode, because I've talked about it at least 2 or 3 times before on episodes. Did one on Elizabeth Warren in April, did one on Susan Rice, I believe in June, or was it this month? I forget which. This year has flown by, even with all of the pain that people are experiencing. This year, 2020, has flown by, at least as far as I can see. And for some people, it's not flown by at all. And you can, if this applies to you, again, my deepest condolences to anybody who is suffering in any way. We are all suffering at the moment, obviously, through this coronavirus situation that has really changed our lives. Some people's lives have been affected drastically more seriously than mine might have been, or yours perhaps, if you're listening, if it applies to you. And of course, we're suffering under this tyrannical administration, and we need to do something about that. So in answer to the question that I mentioned earlier that someone on social media asked of me, what will this do? What will this questioning of Bill Barr do? Well, it may not do much of anything except to just establish a congressional record, which is not insignificant. But it is really a question of what are we going to do? Instead of looking at Congress, we know what they have to do because we elect them to do things. And if they don't do them, we vote them out. So you have a choice to do that this November, or prior to that if you're early voting. And by the way, at least 38 states have early voting. 38 out of the 50 states, maybe more, maybe 40 states have early voting. So most states in the country have early voting. So you know what, with the question that you ask, please go and early vote and vote out people who are not getting the job done. Vote out people who are obstructing your benefits. If you're someone who this applies to, you see the Republicans proposing $200. How does a family survive on $200 extra if they have been laid off in a situation like this due to this virus being a devastating thing? How does a family of 3 or 4 or 5, a family of 4, how do they survive on that money? You got to vote these folks out. These Republicans who are not stepping to the plate, vote all of these Republicans out. None of them are stepping to the plate at all. Vote them out. And put in Democrats who are going to do something, because there are progressives out there who are going to do something. Keep these corporate Democrats honest and vote for people who are going to get the job done. Mitch McConnell, as a Republican, he's not got the job done. All he's done is gotten the job done for billionaires. That's what he's got the job done for. And for Donald Trump, who is not a billionaire, who is broke. So that's what we have to do. That's the answer to the question. When I come back, Delaware. Welcome back. Delaware now, and Delaware, I think, by contrast, much easier. Much easier in the sense that everything is centralized. All of the information that you need as a Delaware voter, and if you are a voter in Delaware and you're listening to this, you will certainly want to keep listening to this, because it is an opportunity for you to, right now, as we are in late July, to start thinking right now about a plan. Have a plan now to vote and organize your mind into what you're going to be doing here in terms of what your plan is for November. And prepare now. Be prepared now, because trust me on this. I think this year's gone by quickly. I mean, maybe many of you will feel the same. Many of you will not feel the same, because there's been a lot of things that have gone on that have really rocked us, and maybe rocked you as well, even more severely. But this Delaware webpage is really good. One of the best ones. Everything is in one place. That is a rare thing to say. And I was just rabbiting on a few minutes ago about, well, you know, if you go on a phone, you'll find everything everywhere. Social media, there's an allure to it because everything's concentrated in one really small place, on your phone usually, or some small device. And here I've just been blown out of the water because Delaware's website is really good. So you go to Delaware Voter, you go to elections.delaware.gov. That's elections.delaware, DELAWARE.gov. Elections.delaware.gov. What you do once you get there is you will find a really good, comprehensive look and list of everything. Everything. This is really good. This website. It will give you these messages. They'll give you phone numbers. Right there, it flashes phone numbers up in front of you. I mean, you know, when you go on websites these days, you have to hunt for it for 5-10 minutes until you see that little small piece of writing, small print that says, contact us. And you it's like you found gold because you just don't see that usually. And God bless them, Delaware, man, they have the phone numbers flashing at you on the homepage. You will see, it will be about 10 seconds before you see the number, less than 10. I mean, that's great. So anyway, there's how to vote stuff. There's instructions on vote by mail. It's just great. Then you scroll down gently. You scroll down slowly, and you will see a blue bar going across the bottom underneath what says Department of Election State Election Commissioner. You will see a blue bar that goes underneath that. And there is a heading there. There's about 6 headings there. One of them is for voters. You click on for voters. It's just great. This is really good. And you see voter services. It brings you to that page. It says voter services. Underneath that, voter registration. Determine if you are qualified to vote in Delaware. There's stuff there on convicted felons, and they are eligible to vote in Delaware, subject to certain requirements. There's voting machine demos. This is great stuff. Voters with special needs, complaints, this, that, the other. It's terrific. The first one, though, is the one I think most of you will need. If you're looking to see if you are registering to vote, if you want to register to vote, click on the top one, which is voter registration. And then there's a whole host of questions and answers, and it's just whoa. So that's that, right? That's just one thing I want to get to. But really what you want to do, once you're on that homepage of elections.delaware.gov, the original address that I gave you, what you want to do, it's really, really good stuff here. What you want to do on that same page, there where I said there's a blue band that goes underneath where it says Department of Elections, State Election Commissioner, there's something that says for voters, candidates, register, results, voter tools. You really want to go to voter tools. Voter tools is the one you want to go to. And you click on voter tools. It's an icon that's I guess the fifth icon from the left and the second icon from the right. Click on voter tools. That brings you to a place where it says voter tools. Who knew? And then the first thing you see on the left column underneath voter tools is online voter registration. Click on the place where it says register, the small heading that says register. Click on that, and you're brought to the registration lookup mail ballot and absentee requests. So then you fill in your information and you go from there. By the way, you will also see on that same page where it is saying to you registration, lookup, mail, ballot, and absentee requests, you will see in small blue print, just a little bit below it. You can easily miss it though, so be careful here. You will see right above where you put your first name in to look yourself up to see if you are, you're checking your registration. That's what registration lookup is. Checking your voter registration, checking to see if you are still registered to vote. So you come here for that, but there's also a blue link for not yet registered ? That you might easily skip past. It's right above where it says first name. So you click on not yet registered. So if you've not registered to vote in Delaware, you will want to click on not yet registered. And Delaware is, wow, they are really helpful. They even tell you the process, what your steps are going to be. There's 9 steps, the terms and agreement, confirm eligibility, personal information, blah, blah, blah. And it's great. And you literally they walk you through this. So once you see the terms and agreement at the bottom, you start from there. You agree to the terms, you click on the next arrow, and then you go through step by step. That is really good stuff. Delaware is one of the best I've seen. Very simple. So for Delaware voters, that's what you need to do. If you have never registered before in Delaware, but you are a resident in Delaware, this is what you do. And I'll say it again from the top. You go to, or for any Delaware voter, but this is what you do if you've never registered before, or if you want to register to vote in Delaware. You go to elections.delaware.gov. You go to voter tools. On that page, you scroll down till you see voter tools. It will be contained in a blue, kind of deep blue, blue band across the middle, kind of the middle of the page, or not quite the middle of the page, but it's under the Department of Elections, State Election Commissioner banner. And voter tools is in that blue section of icons. There's 6 of them. Click on voter tools, and you see underneath voter tools, online voter registration, and you go from there. It's just terrific. Click on register, and then away we go. You can check your registration there, and you can also click on not yet registered if you've not registered, and that's how you register to vote. That is Delaware. That is simple. And thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.